It was a weapon that looked like a toy. It was a simple steel tube, open at both ends, equipped with a rudimentary wooden stock and a primitive electric trigger. When Colonel Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Uhl first presented it to the High Command of the United States Ordnance Department, the reaction wasn't just skepticism, it was open mockery. The generals looked at this hollow pipe, then looked at the massive, multi-ton artillery pieces they were currently investing millions of dollars into, and they laughed. They called it Buck Rogers stuff. They called it a science fiction fantasy. They called it useless. But just 2 years later, amidst the burning sands of North Africa and the hedgerows of Normandy, those same generals would be begging for thousands of these tubes. The German tank commanders, who had once reigned supreme as the invincible gods of the battlefield, would learn to fear every bush, every ditch, and every shadow. The weapon that had been ridiculed in the polished offices of Washington, D.C., would go on to rewrite the rules of infantry warfare forever. This is the story of the M1 bazooka, a useless stovepipe that brought the age of the invincible tank to a violent, fiery end. To understand why this weapon was rejected with such arrogance, we must first understand the terrifying reality of 1941. The world was watching the German Wehrmacht roll across Europe with a speed and ferocity that defied logic. The Blitzkrieg was built on the back of the Panzer. These armored behemoths were tearing through defensive lines, shrugging off machine gun fire, and crushing morale beneath their treads. At that moment, the United States Army was woefully unprepared. Their primary anti-tank weapon was the 37mm gun. It was a beautifully crafted piece of artillery, towed behind a jeep, requiring a full crew to operate. It was accurate, it was traditional, and against modern German armor, it was completely obsolete. Soldiers grimly nicknamed it the pop gun. Reports were already coming in from British forces in North Africa that 37mm shells were bouncing off the hulls of German Panzers like hail off a tin roof. The American infantryman was walking into a modern war naked, with no way to stop the steel monsters coming over the hill. Enter Colonel Leslie Skinner. Skinner was not your typical officer. He was a visionary, an eccentric, and a man obsessed with the technology that the military establishment despised: rockets. In the 1930s and 40s, rockets were considered inaccurate, unstable, and dangerous to the user. The Ordnance Department wanted rifled barrels and predictable ballistics. They didn't want sizzling fireworks that might blow up in a soldier's face. Skinner was banished to the fringes of the research department, working with limited budgets and almost no support. But Skinner had a secret weapon of his own. He wasn't just working on propulsion, he was working on a warhead. He had discovered the military application of the Monroe effect, the shaped charge. By creating a cone-shaped hollow in the explosive, the force of the blast could be focused into a superheated jet of molten metal capable of punching through solid steel armor plate. It was a devastating concept. The problem was delivery. You couldn't fire a shaped charge from a traditional cannon because the spin of the shell dissipated the focusing effect. It needed to hit the target straight on, without spinning. Skinner realized the rocket was the perfect delivery system. It didn't need a heavy barrel or a massive recoil mechanism. It carried its own propellant. The launcher didn't need to be a cannon. It just needed to be a guide rail. Alongside his assistant, Lieutenant Edward Uhl, Skinner worked tirelessly in a makeshift workshop. They cobbled together a launcher from scrap metal. It was crude. It was ugly. It looked like a piece of sewer pipe with a sight welded on top. When they finally secured a meeting with the brass in early 1942, the tension was palpable. The generals were gathered to watch a demonstration of a new spigot mortar, a heavy, cumbersome device that they were inclined to approve. Skinner and Uhl weren't even on the official schedule. They were the sideshow. As the mortar crew struggled to set up their heavy equipment, Uhl saw his chance. He stepped forward with the tube on his shoulder. The generals snickered. One officer reportedly asked if he intended to fight the Germans with a trombone. Uhl loaded a practice rocket. He aimed at a moving tank target hundreds of yards away. The electric trigger clicked. With a distinctive asterisk whoosh asterisk, the rocket screamed out of the tube. It didn't have the crack of a rifle or the boom of a cannon. It was a new sound on the battlefield. The rocket slammed directly into the turret of the moving target. Silence fell over the testing ground. It might have been luck. Oh, reloaded. He fired again. Another hit. He fired a third time. Another hit. The laughter died instantly. The Chief of Staff, General George Marshall, who was present that day, watched the toy demolish the target. He turned to the ordnance officers who had spent months blocking Skinner's funding. Marshall's order was brief and absolute. I want 5,000 of these. And I want them immediately. The useless weapon had just saved its own life. But the real test was yet to come. The weapon was rushed into production with unprecedented speed. It was officially designated the 2.36-inch rocket launcher M1, but the troops immediately found a better name. It reminded them of a bizarre musical instrument used by the radio comedian Bob Burns. They called it the bazooka. The first batch was shipped to North Africa for Operation Torch in late 1942. The secrecy was so high that many of the troops receiving them hadn't even been trained on how to use them. They were unpacking these tubes in the middle of a war zone, reading the instruction manuals by flashlight. Then came the first engagement. It is a moment that should be etched in military history. A German panzer column was advancing, confident in its invulnerability against infantry. They saw American soldiers hiding in the scrub, but they didn't see any anti-tank guns, no towed artillery, no heavy emplacements. The tank commanders likely smiled. This would be a massacre. Suddenly a soldier rose from the grass, a long tube balanced on his shoulder. A streak of smoke erupted from the bushes. The lead tank didn't just stop. It was gutted. The shaped charge warhead struck the armor. The copper cone collapsed, and a jet of plasma moving at 25,000 feet per second burned a hole through the steel plate. Inside the tank, the effect was catastrophic. Molten metal sprayed the interior, igniting ammunition and fuel. The tank was dead in seconds. The German column halted in confusion. This was impossible. There was no muzzle flash, no report of a heavy gun. Just a lone infantryman and a trail of smoke. Before they could react, more rockets flew. The psychological impact was even more devastating than the physical destruction. For the first time in the war, the German tanker realized he was not safe. The infantryman, previously essentially helpless against armor, had been given the power of a god. He carried a cannon on his shoulder. The bazooka changed the geometry of the battlefield. Tanks could no longer operate with impunity in cities or forests. Every corner, every window, every hedgerow could hide a rocket team. The useless weapon forced the Wehrmacht to change its entire tactical doctrine. They had to attach infantry screens to their tanks to protect them from the men with the tubes. However, the story of the bazooka has a bitter, ironic twist, one that highlights the dangers of underestimating a technology. In the chaos of the North African campaign, several American bazookas were captured by German forces. The American generals had dismissed the weapon for years, but the German engineers did not make the same mistake. When they examined the captured M1 launchers, they were horrified by their own vulnerability, but they were also inspired. They took the American design, analyzed it, and realized they could improve it. They increased the caliber from 60mm to 88mm to give it more punching power. They added a blast shield to protect the operator. They created the Panzers, the tank terror. It was a grim irony. The weapon the US Army had ridiculed was so effective that the enemy copied it, improved it, and turned it back against the Allies. For the rest of the war, American tanks would face the terrifying offspring of their own rejected technology. But the legacy of the bazooka goes beyond the Panzers. It proved that the era of the heavy, complex, rifled anti-tank gun was over for the infantry. It paved the way for the RPGs and guided missiles that dominate modern warfare. It democratized destruction. By 1945, General Dwight D. Eisenhower listed the bazooka as one of the 4 tools of victory that won the war for the Allies, alongside the atomic bomb, the Jeep, and the C-47 transport plane. Think about that for a moment. A weapon that was laughed out of the room, called a toy and starved of funding, ended up in the same category as the atomic bomb in the eyes of the Supreme Allied Commander. It serves as a stark reminder of the blindness of experts. The generals in 1941 were fighting the previous war, obsessed with heavy steel and big bores. They couldn't see that a hollow tube and a rocket, a piece of Buck Rogers nonsense, was the future. The bazooka wasn't just a metal tube. It was a lesson in humility. It taught the military establishment that innovation rarely comes from the center. It comes from the fringes, from the tinkerers in the sheds who refuse to listen when they are told their ideas are useless.